Thank you for the introduction. Yes, I'm an honorary clinical lecturer at UCL, and I want to talk to you about hormones and how these are relevant to exercises that we might be working with. So yes, that's a little shameless plug for my book. And I want to start off with this, actually, the quote from Hippocrates, which I think is very relevant. And he said, if we could give every individual just the right amount of nourishment and exercise, not too little and not too much, we would have found the safest way to health. And I think that resonates today as much as it did 2000 years ago. So the outline of what I want to talk to you about this evening is, first of all, hormones and exercise and how this is applicable to the general population in terms of preventative medicine and helping treat and manage conditions, and then home in on the active populations. I'm just wondering if I can make this a bit bigger. Right. Hopefully I know my slides pretty well. So what are hormones? The word hormone is actually derived from ancient Greek, meaning to set in motion. And that precisely describes the mechanism of action of hormones. If you remember that hormones enter the cell, go to the nucleus, the DNA, and they direct gene expression. So they bring to life DNA, if you will. And this means that they have a very powerful effect on health, both physical and mental health, and as we'll see a little bit later, also on the performance in terms of exercise performance as well. So this summarizes what I've sort of said just now, that hormones are central to directing gene expression and therefore key determinants of health. But also, interestingly, these hormones are affected by our lifestyle choices, specifically around exercise and nutrition, just as Hippocrates said. I would also add in sleep. This is very important as well, particularly for hormones function itself. Sleep is when many of these hormones spring into action and drive positive adaptations to exercise. And this is summarized in this diagram, that these three key behaviors, lifestyle choices, if we can encourage people and for ourselves get these in the optimal range all at the same time, then this will certainly support healthy hormone function and therefore optimize health and performance. So putting this into context and practice, where might this be useful? Well, I think you've probably seen, I say hot off the press, I think it was a couple of months ago now, that certainly exercise is one of the keystones of preventative medicine. And it's important to emphasize that exercise should cover, ideally, both cardiovascular types of exercise and also strength types of exercise for healthy longevity. This exercise is also very helpful in the management of certain endocrine conditions, the diabetes, PCOS, and menopause. In the interest of time, I won't go too much into how exercise can help in the management of diabetes mellitus, but with a colleague, Richard Bracken, who presented, indeed, I invited him to present at a BASEM spring conference a couple of years ago. We have written about exercise in this context. So I will leave that for today. So PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. This exercise and lifestyle can be very, very helpful in managing this condition. So what is it exactly, PCOS? It's actually very common. It's the second most common endocrine condition after diabetes, and up to 10% of women are thought to maybe have PCOS. And it's diagnosed according to the Rotterdam criteria that the woman must display 2 out of the 3 signs and symptoms of irregular cycles, clinical or biochemical evidence of excess androgen production, testosterone in other words, and or the appearance of multiple follicles on pelvic ultrasound. The only problem is that there are some other conditions where you can see multiple follicles on pelvic ultrasound. So it's not as straightforward as it might first appear. But important to emphasize that there's also a metabolic component of PCOS, the full-blown syndrome, which isn't part of the diagnostic criteria, but essentially this conveys insulin resistance, similar to what we see in type 2 diabetes. And it's for this reason that exercise and lifestyle is particularly helpful in managing this endocrine condition of PCOS. Of course, the management will be directed what the woman wants to achieve, if she wants to seeks to become pregnant or not, but whatever her objectives are, certainly exercise will play a big, important role in managing this endocrine condition. So the things seem to be a little bit laggy, so hopefully it's going to move on to my next slide, which is another instance, thank you, of another area where exercise can be used as a very helpful tool in managing hormone health. And this, sadly, is what happens to our hormones as we age. So in both men and women, there's a decline in growth hormone. Growth hormone, very important for metabolic health and body composition. For men, there is a slight decrease in testosterone after the age of 50, but of course, we know that there's a dramatic decrease in the ovarian hormones, estradiol and progesterone, for women when they reach menopause. And this is certainly a very important group where exercise can be hugely beneficial. And we definitely need to be considering and supporting this group of women, because after all, every woman will go through menopause at some point in her life. And with increasing life expectancy, a woman can expect to spend at least a third of her life in the menopausal state, which brings with it not only challenges in terms of quality of life, but also in terms of increased risk of medical conditions such as osteoporosis and cardiovascular disease. So certainly a group where hormones are changing, and we need to look to ways to support women through this challenge. And this is what happens to the hormones. So this is on the left, you see the beautiful choreography of the female menstrual cycle. And then after menopause, the point in time when the ovaries retire, you can see there's a sharp decline, well, very low levels of estrogen and progesterone with high levels of FSH and LH. So what are the tools we have at our disposal in terms of lifestyle and specifically exercise that can help women through this tricky time, and particularly the transition from having regular menstrual cycles to menopause, known as the perimenopause, when the hormones, I describe them as Vivaldi in the 4 seasons. They're changing. Some cycles will be fine, others will be anovulatory, and it's, yeah, the hormones get in a little bit of a mess for a while. But there's plenty of evidence and sound research to show that exercise has many beneficial effects for women of this age group. First of all, in terms of exercise can help alleviate severe flushing, which is a disturbance in thermoregulation, and also exercise, particularly strength exercise, is very helpful for resisting the change in body composition, i.e. decline in muscle mass and tendency towards sarcopenia. And also exercise is very helpful, particularly, again, strength exercise in terms of metabolic health. This should be supported, of course, with good nutrition, a focus on protein, and don't forget vitamin D, which actually is a steroid hormone. So I'm definitely claiming it for the hormone army, if you will. And these women will probably need some more sleep and rest and recovery between their exercise sessions. A little bit of a lag. Right, so HRT is also, of course, at our disposal. And fortunately, the only main contraindication for HRT is previous personal history of breast cancer. And actually looking at all the facts supplied by the British Menopause Society, we know that although there is a slight increase in breast cancer cases in those women taking HRT, this is actually counterbalanced and by women taking 2.5 hours or more of exercise per week, which decreases the number of breast cancer cases, you can see there, by 7. And this compares to women, menopausal women who are not on HRT, but are not taking regular exercise and indeed overweight and maybe drinking and smoking. And there's a whopping increase in breast cancer there. So you can see that it's advising on HRT lifestyle is absolutely fundamental to helping women deal with menopause, but HRT is certainly at our disposal. And women should, I love this quote, that women should be treated as individuals, not statistics. So it's an individual joint decision between a woman and her prescribing doctor. Right, just trying to change slide. Okay, so that was just to give you an idea of some of the areas where I think that exercise is such an important tool in both preventative medicine and managing concurrent endocrine issues, just as Hippocrates said. So now I want to move on for the second bit of my talk about the active population, so the athletes and the dancers. What's new in this area? Right, so why, I mean, it seems sort of obvious, why do athletes and dancers train? Because obviously they hope and they expect their performance will improve, but what exactly is driving those adaptations, those positive adaptations to this exercise training? And of course, the answer lies in the hormones. And you can see here, hormones drive positive adaptations in physical terms, in terms of body composition, bone health, cardiovascular fitness, but also importantly for mental health. And these hormones support that aspect of exercise training. So this is a sort of a similar diagram to what I've shown you already, that key to benefiting from these positive adaptive changes in the endocrine networks, the athlete has to look to balancing their behaviors in terms of the training load, periodization of training, nutrition, adequate and good timing, and also sufficient recovery when those hormones would drive positive adaptations. So that's what the athlete is aiming to do, and what we are trying to support the athlete or dancer to achieve. But there can become an unbalanced situation where energy demand is not matched by adequate energy intake. And this diagram illustrates this point. So you can see in the central column, you can see an athlete looking very happy because this athlete has balance in terms of energy intake, is sufficient to cover the energy demands from exercise, shown in blue at the top, and also the residual energy, that's known as energy availability, is sufficient to maintain basic physiological function, and the energy is roughly equivalent to the basal metabolic rate. So that's all fine. If you look at, though, at the athlete on your right, you will see this is an athlete in a situation of unintentional low energy availability. Although eating the same amount as their colleague, they have a higher training load, maybe a training camp or build up to a competition. And so therefore, they will end up in a situation of low energy availability, shown in the red. The athlete on your left is a slightly more complex athlete who has a situation of intentional low energy availability. This athlete has restricted what they're eating in the hope and belief that this will confer a performance advantage or maybe meet an aesthetic requirement for their particular discipline. But of course, the downside is that they will end up in low energy availability. So not sufficient, in other words, there is not sufficient energy available to maintain basic metabolic and physiological demands. And this is what it means in terms of the hormone networks. So low energy availability, as you can see, will get transmitted to the master controller, the hypothalamus in the brain, which is in turn in control of the conductor of the endocrine orchestra, the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland, quite sensibly, will downregulate many of the hormone systems in order to save energy. This is the body going into eco mode in terms of hormones. So there will be a downregulation of the metabolic rate via the thyroid axis, also the reproductive axis that can save energy by in the case of a female athlete, often manifest as amenorrhea, FHA, functional hypothalamic amenorrhea. Also in male athletes, we have evidence that this will lower testosterone levels, and this has an adverse effect on bone health. The one endocrine system that gets upregulated, you can see, is cortisol, the stress response, and this sort of compounds the effects of downregulation of the whole endocrine system. So this is not good news if you're in low energy availability. And in practical terms, sorry, getting a slight lag with the clicker. In practical terms, what does this mean for the athlete? It means that they will experience adverse effects both on health and performance. In other words, we are talking about REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport, which is the clinical syndrome, the outcome of low energy availability. So adverse effects on many aspects of health, but crucially, this will adversely impact the athletic performance of the individual. And this is what's going to make the athlete or dancer pay attention. We can, of course, explain the adverse health consequences, but the athlete will want to know if they can win the Olympic gold tomorrow. And so the answer will be, well, probably not, because you won't have the hormones to back up your adaptations from training. So that hopefully will help persuade the athlete to redress their behaviors. What's the latest on REDS? I'm sure we're all familiar with REDS, originally from the IOC Consensus Statement 2014, published in the BASEM. But really, to just highlight some points here, that to remember, we're not talking just about athletes. We must include dancers, and in fact, there's a group of us working in dance companies, asking if maybe we should consider changing it to a version to RED-D, Red in Dancers. And this is an amusing picture. That's actually my grandmother on the left, and that's me at about the same age on the right. So you can see even over 2 generations, there's been an increased demand in performance in dance, and that's just within our family. So we have to bear in mind that this is not just elite athletes. Indeed, I would argue it's more likely to be the amateur aspiring athletes who don't have all the backup of medical teams, etc., and also the dancers that are sometimes, left out of the equation. The update is from the point of view of how to manage a female with FHA as a consequence of REDS, and just to draw your attention to the fact that I'm delighted to announce that I managed to ask, the NICE guidelines have now been changed in response to a letter I wrote last year, and we know that giving the combined oral contraceptive pill in this situation is not advisable because it is not bone protective. It just reinforces the downregulation of the hormones. So just to bring that to your attention, and that if you are worried about bone health meets the criteria set by the IOC of a Z score less than -1 at the lumbar spine or 2 or more stress fractures, then actually bone protection should be provided in the form of HRT, definitely not the contraceptive pill. Also, very interestingly, that's come to light relatively recently, is what's called subclinical ovulatory disturbances. And I highly recommend, if you have not already seen this paper published last year, and I had the pleasure of discussing direct with Professor Geraldine Pryor, her work, amazing, very interesting work on subclinical ovulatory disturbances. So the essence is that we are talking about the tip of the iceberg. When we talk about FHA, amenorrhea, that's kind of a very obvious clinical sign. That's the tip of the iceberg. But underneath, there's a whole spectrum of potential ovulatory disturbances, ranging from insufficient luteal phase, i.e. low levels of progesterone that will not be sufficient to raise the basal metabolic rate, and also maybe a frank anovulatory cycle where not much progesterone is produced at all and no ovulation occurs. Yet the woman will experience or may experience a period, a regular period, but as that's why it's underneath the surface, there might be something else going on. So that's the latest and something to bear in mind. An extra thing to bear in mind when working with female athletes and dancers, I suggest, of course, ask about menstrual cycle, but if there's any extra information you can glean with regard to indications that ovulation might or might not have occurred in terms of cervical mucus or basal body temperature. That's really useful information. And of course, a big fanfare, very proud of the BASEM website, specifically providing information about REDS. Hopefully you're all familiar with this, Health for Performance. I wrote this together with many colleagues, so thank you very much to my colleagues for helping in the production of this. And you can see it's divided into various sections so that it can be tailored for the athlete or the dancer, the parent, the coach, or the healthcare professional. It's the same, essentially the same information in each of those sections, but couched in slightly different terms to be appropriate for the person looking at it, and so that everyone is on board. And I try to keep it up to update as much as I can, but any help is welcome and well received. So just to round up now, I think I've pretty much stuck to time, which I'm quite proud of. So I hope you found that interesting, just to outline this really important interaction between well, going back to what Hippocrates said, that, you know, advising people on the optimal amount of exercise and nutrition, that is the surest way to health through the function of the hormones. And this is applicable both in the general, less active population, already maybe with pre-existing endocrine conditions, and certainly really super important when we're talking about active populations. So, yeah, just remains to recommend my book to you. I hope that's not too cheeky to do so, because I discuss this in further detail. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'm going to let the team